So BAF is a 501c3 nonprofit that aims to accelerate blockchain education and awareness. We are launching accredited classes on the host networking and educational meetups like this one. We try to support blockchain clubs all over the world, and we ourselves are supported by NIR and Algorand that help us keep running. So Maya, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Alexis. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is an event part of our blockchain BAF Impact series that we recently launched, where we highlight projects, initiatives that have some sort of social or environmental impact on the ground. And today I'm super excited to have Sarah from Regen Network join us as our speaker. Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself to the group, and then I'll have some questions prepared for you, and then we can also have an open Q&A at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, Maya. For everyone listening, my name is Sarah Baxendell. I am currently I'm the Director of Ecosystem for Regen Network Development Incorporated, which is the software development company that is really building a lot of the blockchain software and the tools that the community is utilizing on Regen Network. So welcome to our Web3 and ReFi chat today.
Amazing, thanks. Oh, and also I forgot to mention, I'm an Impact Fellow at BAF, helping organize these Impact series, but I'm also a PhD student at UC Santa Barbara, and I'm very interested in all things ReFi and intersection of Web3 and climate and social impact more broadly. I want to jump more into your background a little bit, Sarah, because I'm very curious to kind of connect people, from Web3 who come into Web3 from somewhere in Web2 and so-called legacy institutions. Can you tell a little bit what you did before joining Regen, and what made you want to join Regen? How did you get introduced to the whole ReFi space? So what was your life pre-Web3?
Yeah, my life pre-Web3. It's funny to think about. Yeah, so I have been working in climate impact for over a decade. And my background is originally in finance. I used to work for the JP Morgan Private Bank. I used to manage hedge funds. So I'm very financially oriented. I'm very math oriented. But I had the privilege when I was living in New York City about a decade ago to begin my education about what was happening to our climate. And so I ultimately ended up meeting quite a few people in the New York City climate impact scene, in the food systems groups, in urban farms, permaculture designers. And I had the privilege of being exposed to what urban ecological intervention projects can look like, particularly when they're developed at the grassroots scale and they are developed and designed and implemented and managed by communities themselves. And I happened to accidentally get an email from someone saying that Radiohead was playing in Zuccotti Park in the financial district of Manhattan. And it ended up being Occupy Wall Street, ironically, that I ended up in. It was not Radiohead playing that day. So the universe sort of took me downtown, and I became entrenched in environmental activism community, ended up being an organizer for the Occupy Wall Street Sustainability Working Group, and began my personal journey that I traversed through really learning to farm, going upstate to New York, really learning about the food system, really learning about the impact of ecology from the ground level. And right before Regen, I had the privilege in the city of Pittsburgh for 6.5 years of being what is called in that environment a green space planner. Really what that means is that I worked on behalf of the communities of 11 neighborhoods in the city of Pittsburgh. And I worked with those communities. We worked with over 25,000 community members to take a look at their parks, take a look at their vacant land, take a look at their city, take a look at their streets, and say, what are the ways in which communities are already using these landscapes? And at a municipal level, what are the ways in which these landscapes could be utilized to address systemic climate issues? And so in that context, examples that do exist and are actually quite real in the city of Pittsburgh are combined sewage overflow, flooding when there's water events, water quality. So a lot of the work that I ended up doing in that time period had to do with working with communities through the master planning process of parks. And so really I led communities through the conversation and the facilitated experience of saying, hey, here's how we're already using the park. Here's what we would love to see updated in this park. And sat down with landscape architects and the city to ultimately uncover, could this park capture water under the new football field? Could we restore a stream and stop flooding in a neighborhood? Could we utilize goats in a park to eat invasive species and replant trees? What are the tactics that we can employ at a very local community, neighbors picking up trash level? And what could we do as a city, getting real municipal infrastructure investment? And so when I was in the process of redeveloping these parks in Pittsburgh, I was also in the process of redeveloping a distinct piece of land called Hilltop Urban Farm. And Hilltop Urban Farm used to be a federal housing complex in the city of Pittsburgh that was closed down in the 90s, and it was closed off for 30 years. And it's 107 acres inside of the city, which is a very massive piece of land. And I worked with the communities there and the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council and the Urban Agriculture Working Group distinctly to develop a regional coalition of urban agriculture nonprofits that designed and built and implemented the largest urban farm in the country with the largest urban farming training program for adults. So I met the team of Regen in Pittsburgh at a conference talking about Hilltop Urban Farm and my love for this piece of land that is very personal to me because my grandfather actually grew up 5 houses from the gate of this particular place. So my journey to Regen came through my journey through land and my journey through landscape and my relationship to how I, as a designer within ecosystems and places and peoples, can create scalable, replicable tools and systems and examples of what a climate positive future could look for all of us. So I'll maybe pause there because that was a bit of an arc to tell a story about.
Oh, that was awesome. I got really captivated by this transition from JP Morgan to Occupy Wall Street to working on a farm and being on the ground, seeing the effects of different land use practices. That's so awesome. And and it's great to kind of see your to know about your career transition, because I'm curious, how was it for you to switch industries? And now, like you said, you met Regen people at a conference. Did you know anything about Web3 before that? Was it difficult for you to kind of wrap your head around, okay, how do we bring these practices and put them on chain? So yeah, any sort of personal take on how is working in ReFi different from a more traditional sector?
Yeah, so my projects before this that were climate impact oriented were primarily nonprofits, were primarily city planning. So my background is really more in landscape planning itself and those community processes. And so I came to Web3 by Regen, and ultimately I ended up at Regen, frankly, by an accident. I for a long time was talking with the team about what they were developing, and I wanted to develop something that could have global impact because I had done a place-based implementation project that had regional implications on the food system. So what I would say is fundamentally different comes down to really, I think, 2 pieces. One is that Web3 is ultimately a software development environment. Everything's on the blockchain. You do have to learn an entirely different new sets of technologies and ways of thinking that are both highly specific and completely abstract at the same time often. So it's a very different way of approaching content and information. The other piece that I think is very different, but also kind of exactly identical, is that in Web3, we're really talking about having a conversation with our community at all junctures. We're really trying to have discussions and inquiries and create things based on our responses to those inquiries, our needs, our unmet needs. And so for me, that process in Web3 of community development, of community co-creation, of really building technical tools that can serve landscape-oriented in landscape impact functions, that to me is really a community process. And that is very, very much identical to the same kinds of experiences I had as a park planner in Pittsburgh, because a lot of it was sitting on old ladies' porches, and just listening about people's relationship to that place. And now you're talking about people's relationship to how technical tools can give them the liberty, the freedom, and the agency to create ecological impact in their own community. They're really tools and processes that we're all in conversation with together.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I love this idea of co-creation and community orientation, which the technology like a Web3 largely allows. And kind of going off of that, I just wanted to step back and like look at the big picture, because I already used the term, but I'm curious how you define this new movement of ReFi, right, regenerative finance. How do you see its mission? Maybe your personal assessment. How do you think it's a movement? How did it become a movement? And why do we need this blockchain aspect in the climate space to begin with? Like, what problem does blockchain solve for in comparison to kind of traditional nonprofits working in the same area?
Yeah, that was a big question. Maybe I'll start with blockchain, and then you can remind me of the first half of the question. I think blockchain helps both as a record-keeping and coordination tool. I also think that blockchain is really replicable and scalable. And where I've seen impacts from blockchain to real-world communities, and just a really practical example I can give is Regen Network is launching Regen Marketplace, which is essentially our storefront for ecological impact projects. The company and people can come fall in love with someone's forest preservation project and buy an offset and go carbon neutral. And in that, one of the things that we did in preparation for that is we pre-purchased all of these city forest credits from primarily land conservancies across the United States that are all doing urban forest preservation and restoration projects. And in the journey of finding this particular portfolio, which really was me trying to solve a Web3 coordination issue here, I stumbled across an organization called Allegheny Land Trust, which is the land trust that was on my board at Hilltop Urban Farm in Pittsburgh. And I know from knowing our relationship to these projects right now that the money that they were able to receive for these credits up front has allowed many of these organizations to go and purchase new forest parcels and protect them. So I see blockchain as a way of coordinating all of us and also giving us all the capacity to govern those systems and govern those tools. On Regen Network, it's the blockchain of Regen Ledger code. So if we want to change that, we have to go through community governance. All 17,000 wallet holders have to make a group decision about whether or not that new technology, that feature is really the next use case that we want to solve. It's really what we need as a community in order to have the tools to have ecological impact be linked to finance. And that's really what people are focused with the moniker ReFi around, is around the concept of regenerative finance. And my relationship to regenerative finance is through Regen Network, but it carries this very distinct lens of regenerative business through the teachings of Carol Sanford, who has written many books on what it means to be regenerative business, what it means to think and operate and develop in a way that is both regenerative for your human experience to that development, as well as to the system that you're ultimately trying to change. So I believe that ReFi is a series of tools that we are building that allows for faster coordination between the markets and ecological impact in a way that can accelerate our response to climate change by moving capital into the hands of those who need it most, which are the people who are preserving, restoring, regenerating land or ocean or riparian buffer or planting trees in a park. It's those people, it's those stewards that we're trying to empower. And the tools are just a part of the system that helps for that transfer of exchange to happen in a way where the community owns that system and the community governs that system. That governance mechanism, to me at least, is a fundamental difference between just basic market exchange of any commodity, for example. So maybe pause there.
Oh, that was a beautiful transition from why we need blockchain into what ReFi is. Yeah, that was a great explanation of kind of the tooling that's required to allow for this community-owned and governed climate activism, essentially. And now I wanted to dive deeper into Regen Network as the organization. And if you can just kind of give us a pitch of what exactly is Regen Network, what are your goals, and how do you achieve them?
So Regen Network is first and foremost a blockchain community. Anybody that holds the Regen governance token is a part of Regen Network and is a part owner of it. So it's first and foremost a community. It's a community whose goal is ultimately to have ecological regeneration, the actual restoration of the planet, be our primary solution that we try to accomplish to the best of our ability to affect climate change. So we're ultimately working to build the tools that make that possible in a way where the community owns and governs that tools in that system. So primarily, we have done a handful of things that serve this purpose. One is we have developed the blockchain code of Regen Ledger, which is the blockchain itself. So the validators, are dealing with all the information that flows in there. And then ultimately, we have built an application that allows for every Regen wallet holder to use the functions of that blockchain. And so these user interfaces that are going to be released in Regen Marketplace and, maybe even as early as next week, they allow for folks to be able to mint ecological assets, for them to be able to sell ecological assets, to trade those ecological assets, to retire those ecological assets for carbon offsetting purposes. And the tools of futures will be expanded beyond that basic palette into being able to pre-sell credits for a project or fundraise for the purchase of a forest, allowing some of these expanded use cases to emerge. So we're building a series of tools and a marketplace that allows for these project developers, these farmers, the people planting kelp in the oceans, the people planting trees in their park, for them to get credit for all of this fantastic work that they're doing that does legitimately have ecosystem services associated with it. And by valuing those and by creating a place where there can be the financial transfer, we're putting capital in the hands of the organizations to continue stewarding those spaces and to expand the stewardship of those spaces. So I'll pause there to see what else you have, questions you have for me today.
Oh, I have so many, but this is so interesting. And I find the whole structure of Regen Network is very interesting because you have kind of different functions, like you're rolling out marketplace, like you mentioned, and I want to talk a little bit about it a little bit later, and also how you work with other ecological impact DAOs. But right before we jump into that, I'm just also curious about Regen team and how who is behind Regen. Like, how do you essentially divide roles? Do you have like climate scientists and then engineers and then researchers, and how is the governance set up? You mentioned, that the Regen Network is first and foremost a community. So how do you? So if you can talk a little bit more about Regen governance tokens.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the community. So, if we start with the concept that Regen Network is a blockchain and the blockchain is a community of people that have these governance tokens, Governance primarily happens around a couple of different things. It's about around upgrading the software code. It's around questions like, what currencies should we use in the marketplace? It's also about allowing the community to govern the ecological impact standards. So someone is designing a new credit class. It's a new type of credit. Let's say it's for planting trees in a riparian buffer to stabilize the edge of the river or the stream. Allowing the community to vote on that science, to take a look at what that asset's going to be and to weigh in on that, and to be able to collectively govern what we think standards for a system that is valuing ecological impact work should look like. So inside of the network, there's a number of different organizations that actually serve very different functions. So we have Regen Foundation, which is a US-based 501c3 organization, and they focus on a program called CSDAO, Community Supported DAO Program. And what they're tasked with from the white paper is to take 1/3 of the original Genesis tokens. There were 100 million at the start, so 33 million approximately. And so what they're doing with those tokens through this program is they are finding ecological organizations across the globe that represent different ecosystems. They represent different indigenous communities. They represent, a whole, New England farmers. They're big organizations. And these organizations are permanently joining the governance of Regen Network. They're being endowed with chunks of Regen Network tokens to become permanent stewards of that governance process, to own and steward that network, and to ensure that the voice of land and the stewards and the oceans and the seas, people actually living in these places, actually doing the work in these places, and the people that will be most affected by climate change are in fact the biggest governing voice of the entire network. Another organization we have is a group called Cerulean Ventures. They're a new venture capital fund that invests both in organizations that are building in the Regen Network ecosystem, as well as organizations that are building in the Cosmos ecosystem, because Regen Ledger is built on the Cosmos SDK. Our blockchain engineering teams have long been developers of the Cosmos SDK with the Interchain Foundation. And then the third organization that's kind of in this triad, and there are hundreds of other organizations and other projects that are a part of Regen Network. There's a resource that is fairly easy to find on Twitter called Built on Regen. You can go to hashtag Built on Regen and find it. It is a page that highlights every organization that is developing a methodology, designing new credit, doing an impact project, having a ReFi conference, building on the code. It's a whole representation of all of the community-based projects from third-party organizations that are a part of the community. So it's all of these people that are building together and all of these people that are governing together. There's one final organization in this matrix of community, which is like lots and lots and lots of people. And that is an org called Regen Network Development Incorporated. And Regen Network Development Inc. is the software development company. We code Regen Ledger, we code Cosmos SDK, and we help to architect and design the basic features of what the Regen Network blockchain does with other community and other developers. So we take a big lead in that blockchain software development. So inside of that organization, there's front-end, back-end engineers, we have Cosmos SDK engineers, we have product teams, we have the Regen registry team that works with all of the standards and the credit design. And then we also have in-house a team that is the Regen Network science team, which is led by Dr. Giselle Booman and a gentleman named Ned, who used to be a NASA remote sensing scientist, and they do science work. They test out methodologies, they look at data sets, they do remote sensing, they work with all of the communities on the ground that are trying to figure out the right way to quantify their ecological outcomes. And they test new ideas and help to develop new science in-house in support of all the organizations building in Regen Network. So maybe I'll pause there and see if you have any other questions about the world of Regen and the whole community.
Well, I feel like we can have a whole separate Twitter space about the Regen structure and all the moving parts. That's really cool, and so many layers to the work that you do. And I kind of wanted to touch on one of the things you talked about, how Regen allocates tokens and goes, around the world and looks for organizations to support, right, as some ecological impact DAOs. So what kind of organizations do you support, and how do you select them? Is there a certain methodology for, which organizations you work with, which ones you don't? Who makes that kind of judgment call? Yeah, how does that process work?
So there's two different ways, three different ways in which communities have been directly supported within the history of Regen Network. I don't work for Regen Foundation, so I am not capable of defining the exact way in which the CS DAOs are chosen, although I know that there is a formal process for that. But if anyone wants to contact the foundation, I'm happy to get folks in touch with them. But there's also a program that we have this year at R&D Inc. called, it's just our community funding grant program, where there were over 40 projects that received direct funding to develop methodologies, to develop new code, to develop out new interfaces, all kinds of cool stuff was funded by the organization. That particular program was a big vote of all R&D Inc. team members. We work as an extreme consensus, as I would describe our style. If I had to put a word to it, it's extreme consensus. So everybody has an open opportunity to weigh in within the organization when we do that program, which is really cool to see. People have such fantastic feedback. It's really fun. And then the third way in which communities and projects are directly supported within Regen Network is something called the community pool. And the community pool is a piece of Regen tokens that are the governance tokens that are out there for the community. There's a certain pool that is governed by the whole community collective. And the community pool, the way the token inflation works, there's a little slice of token inflation every block that goes to a community pool. It's just the way that it was designed to sort of constantly be funding itself over time. But in order for an organization to request funding from the community pool, they have to go to the Commonwealth Forum. They have to make a pitch to all 17,000 wallet holders and go through a public governance process in order to be granted Regen tokens for use that is within Regen Network's mission. You have to be building something in Regen Network, developing a project in Regen Network. Your work has to be in the Regen Network ecosystem to be eligible for a community pool. But that is the third way in which projects can get resources and be resourceful within the community by participating in that community decision-making process. So I will pause there.
Wow, extreme consensus. That's quite the term. Love it. That's super interesting. And I actually wanted to talk a little bit about the Regen Marketplace that you were launching. You said maybe within the next few days. I'm actually curious about the timeline. And maybe also talk a little bit about, or maybe clarify some of the terms, since it's an educational event, and for people who are new to the space, maybe if you can clarify the difference between a digital ecological asset versus eco credit versus carbon credit. So, and what exactly is going to be sold and traded on the Regen Marketplace?
Sure. So let's do some definitions first, be like professory. So an eco credit is our term for any type of ecological asset that is designed using the Regen Network tools. So it could be water credit, could be biodiversity credit, could be habitat preservation credit, could be lots of different types of things. So we use the word eco credit to be more expansive around deciding and defining the ecosystem services that you are in fact selling, associated with a very specific place and a very specific project with impact. So inside of that worldview, that is not just a carbon view. There are water quality improvements, soil quality improvements, air quality improvements. There is soil carbon, there's forest carbon, there's ocean carbon. There are a lot of ecosystem services that come from ecological restoration projects that are not distinctly carbon focused. So a way we allow people to use our system when they design a credit class, credits being any kind of eco credit, is that you're choosing a primary indicator. It could be a water quality credit. It could be a carbon credit. And then you're picking secondary indicators, or we call them the plus. So we call it kind of like carbon plus is sort of the style we take with these things. So different communities are designing different types of ecological assets that reflect different ecosystems, different practices, and different places. So maybe I'll pause there and see what other questions you have around that.
Wait, hold on. I'm still, so again, eco asset versus eco credit. So it's essentially the same thing, or so what's the difference between eco credit and eco asset? So communities issue an eco credit and it becomes an eco asset when people buy it, or can you clarify that moment?
When I say eco credits, everything that's developed on the Regen Network marketplace is an eco credit of some kind. Those are all financial assets representing ecological outcomes. So I'm just using financial terms around the explanation of eco credit, but they're all called eco credits. They just come in many, many, many different kinds because there's different kinds of ecosystems whose services like water quality or air quality that you're trying to package up, you're trying to represent, and you're trying to communicate out to people who do want to invest into that type of ecological impact.
Okay, got you. And in that kind of a credit plus class of would you say that carbon credits are the dominant asset that Regen focuses on, or is it something that just the most popular, or like what's the role of carbon credit within this set of assets?
So I think the market, insofar as what will affect climate change, very much has a financial balance sheet associated with carbon. You know, we're counting 4 degrees and rising. You know, how many parts per million? There's a distinct carbon association with that math. But we are trying to be more expansive and trying to really, more than anything, allow community members to be expansive in their design around including other aspects of ecosystem services. So examples that exist, you know, if you go to Built on Regen, there's a jaguar habitat protection credit. There is a kelp forest in the ocean credit. There are credits being designed around riparian buffer restoration, credits designed around vineyard grazing with sheep and goats. Lots of different people are looking at the practices that they're implementing from lots of different angles. One angle is carbon. One angle is other types of ecosystem services that come from those projects, like water quality or water improvement. And other ways that people are looking at this as well is they're looking at it as practice-based credits. So an example is if my sheep every week graze through this vineyard, and that means that we don't have to buy fossil fuels for someone to mow this vineyard, and my sheep are also eating the brush at the end of the vineyard, creating a much more expansive fire break, dealing with the overgrowth of fire brush and fire danger in California. I'm doing a practice that has all of these benefits to ecology, and I should be paid for the doing of that practice. So there's many different ways to package, to monitor, and to incentivize positive ecological restorative action. It just depends on where you are and what someone is doing with the land or the sea as to what is appropriate insofar as your design.
I love that you expand these ecological services not to just, you know, carbon credits, but adapt to, like you're saying, the local conditions, specific projects. And that leads me to the question that I think about a lot, and I think a lot of people have this confusion or around, okay, we get that once we have this ecological asset on chain, it's traceable, you can trade it easily, it's easier to retire it, so there's more transparency, all the good stuff that blockchain allows us to do. But how do you make sure that there is actually impact on the ground? Like, how do you make sure that in the example you used that you did all these great services for the land, but how do you measure that and then put on the chain? And yeah, so how do you bridge that real world and the Web3 world in a way that's also transparent and verifiable?
Lots and lots of science is my answer. Yeah, so in the Regen Network system, in order to create an eco credit, there are two pieces to that puzzle that have to be solved before you can issue anything onto the blockchain. One is something called the credit class, which is all the information about the asset. You know, how long is project term? How are you dealing with additionality? You know, how are you dealing with all of these sort of carbon market style terms? You know, is one credit equal to 1 ton of carbon, or is one credit equal to 1 unit of water quality improvement? These are the types of things that are in a credit class. The other piece of that system are the methodologies. And methodologies are scientific instructions around how you take a specific land management use case, let's say our vineyard sheep as our example. How do I know that the sheep were there? How do I know the impact that sheep were having? How do I know how to measure that impact? All of those instructions are tested and written down in the methodologies. And methodologies in the carbon market and the ecosystem services market are largely developed by universities, they're developed by legitimate scientists, they're developed with practitioners on the ground. And so these are science instructions, and these are science communities working with communities on the ground in order to uncover what the appropriate scientific approach is for each specific use case in regards to what we call monitoring, reporting, and verification. And so monitoring is, how do I know what the outcomes are? What are the outcomes in the first place? Reporting is, you know, I'm going to go check and make sure that those outcomes are real. I'm going to see how big the outcomes are, how small the outcomes are. And then verification, there is the option in the authorship of a methodology in its implementation for monitoring, where everyone who's designing a methodology in a credit class has to decide, do we want to have a third party come and verify that this information is indeed true? And there are cases where that's very appropriate, and there's cases where that's burdensome to small communities, it's burdensome to small nonprofits, and there are a lot of electronic ways, like remote sensing or cameras on a site, that allow you to verify information in ways that's appropriate for the place, the project, and the people that are stewarding that place.
Yeah, this is very interesting, the whole MRV process. And I guess I'm also curious, so, you know, all the science and methodologies that need to be done to make sure there's actually sheep that are being they're doing some sort of a good land management practice. So who does the science and reporting verification? So like you mentioned, a third party, like these are just some sort of trusted universities, institutions? Who does all this methodology science work?
Yeah, so right now there's about 40 different methodologies under development in the Regen Network ecosystem. The first of which was developed by R&D Inc. called Carbon Plus Grasslands. We used that remote sensing methodology and did the monitoring at R&D to see how intensive rotational grazing in Australia had soil carbon impacts, and then sold those credits to Microsoft in 2020. But a lot of these organizations are a mixture of project developers, people that come as veterans from the carbon market space that have long developed projects on existing registries like Vera or Gold Standard or American Carbon Registry. And there's something about the method that just doesn't fit their use case, or there's something about the process that just really doesn't make sense for them. And they want the freedom to design something from their own experience. A lot of these project developers are then partnered with various different types of scientists. So there's an in-house science team at R&D Inc. that provides technical service to folks that are in this process. And then we have folks like UC Davis developing a methodology. We have various different remote sensing folks that are involved with various different methodological development. So it's really a very large science community in the world of Regen Network. It's definitely a big cluster of people. And a lot of what they're trying to do is really develop these open source methods that the whole community can use in order to genuinely improve climate science and be able to authentically package up outcomes and say, yes, this really happened in this place. And what we're saying the outcome is can really truly be verified by scientific monitoring in this place for this time in this specific application.
Really cool, and I love that it has this open source spirit and the community co-creation, like we started this conversation from. And I hope maybe one day UCSB can participate in some of these methodologies, because you mentioned UC Davis. We need to step it up here in Santa Barbara.
You should find Sophia Leiker, who was on here before, who goes to UCSD in the graduate program and who used to work for us. So, and is working with White Buffalo Land Trust in Santa Barbara County, who's one of our grant recipients that's restoring the Hilama Canyon Ranch. So there's a lot actually going on in your area for Regen Network. You should get involved.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. I definitely want to get in touch with Sophia and learn actually what's happening locally, not just participate in virtual events. Awesome. Well, since we kind of ran out of time, I wanted to, and there's so much more I could ask you about the methodologies, but I kind of want to move on to kind of the next area that I'm very curious to hear your response about is kind of challenges and criticisms. And I'm curious, what do you say to kind of these common criticisms by some more, I guess, more traditional NGOs saying, that carbon credits are a scam. It's, tokenizing. Nature is the same as commodification of nature. It's all greenwashing. It's not really solving the problem. It's only just kind of marketizing nature. What's your response to this criticism?
Oof. I feel like I could talk about all of those things for like a year. I can only really speak from my own perspective as a land steward myself, and from my perspective of having led land stewardship and land redevelopment projects throughout my career. And when I think about Hilltop Urban Farm, we spent 2 years redeveloping the soils, cover cropping, pulling out rocks, we did all this ecological restoration work to the site before anyone could even farm it. We planted 252 fruit and nut trees. It was an enormous number of trees. I think about the ecosystem services that doing those things genuinely serve to the city of Pittsburgh, and the way in which that landscape is now holding significantly more water out of the watershed and not causing as much flooding in the real steep hill below it. When I think about that, and I think about how I have seen ecological restoration really change the way a landscape behaves, I know that these outcomes are real, that I can see that they exist, when I'm touching and restoring and implementing projects like this on the ground. So I think that finding a way to authentically have public, community governed, open source science around those outcomes and really digging into those physical impacts that you do see on the land when you do these projects, linking that to the financial market says that you can move capital into these projects. I think that is enormously powerful, particularly because many of these projects are developed by small and medium-sized nonprofits that are always underfunded, and adding another income source to their work based on the outcome of their work is a way in which they can do more. And I think about how I would quantify up the landscapes that I have implemented projects on and how much that money would mean to those immediate communities and to those organizations that steward those places with those communities. I think that's both has the capacity to alter people's social relationship with their local land on a community level, as well as I think it has the opportunity to put capital into landscape restoration. And to me, at the end of the day, if we're really trying to affect climate change, if that is our North Star, then we have to do things and use every tool in our toolkit, particularly the financial tools that help to make things possible in order to accelerate that movement. So that's my personal perspective on where I sit in this work and some of the reasons why I'm driven to this particular intersection around these kinds of topics.
Yeah, that's really powerful, especially since you have this real, on the ground experience. And I feel like oftentimes criticism comes from those who actually don't have that on the ground experience. But I do think it's important to kind of have this critical perspective and make sure that all the, promises are being met. And I think the new ReFi developments are making me very hopeful, and that focus on community, and also coming from nonprofit sector myself. Oh my gosh, I can really relate with the lack of funding aspect of it. It's the worst. So yeah, there's definitely some great potential in the whole crypto industry for that. And kind of besides this common criticism, like what are some of the challenges that you see for the ecosystem, specifically for Regen Network or maybe for the broader ReFi community? What are some things that need to be overcome to achieve all these great initiatives?
I think our challenges are around coordination and around community, around having the right tools, having the right inclusion processes, really going out of our way to include those that are not already included. And I think on that vein, I'm wondering, Maya, if we should see what the people in the audience have questions about in the spirit of community. Because I just think this is a conversation, that we're all having across ReFi, and having everybody's voices in the conversation, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks for mentioning that, because I'm still new to the Twitter Spaces format. Yes, please. Anyone, feel free to jump in. I'm pretty sure you need to raise your hand, and then we'll bring you up as a speaker. If you have a question, comment, yeah, it's an open space. And Alexis, if I'm missing some of the speaker requests, please help me out. Want to make sure we don't exclude anyone.
I haven't seen anyone raise their hands yet, so I suppose if you have another question, pepper away. And folks in the audience, if you have questions or want to jump in the conversation, certainly raise your hand and we'll be happy to bring you up.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and as you're thinking on your questions, I guess my concluding question, because since we are a student-oriented organization, what can you recommend to students, young leaders who are starting out and who want to be involved in the ReFi space? Like what would you I don't know, tell yourself if you were just starting out? Yeah, what are some of the tips you think will be helpful for newcomers to the ReFi space?
Yeah, I think young folks and newcomers should certainly know that first and foremost that they're welcome. And that we're really, I think, a merry band of climate hopeful, climate science nerds, ultimately trying to do what we can together. So certainly an open environment for people to join. I think a good place for someone brand new to just, what is ReFi? Regen Network's great, but we take a very complex and more mature approach to the way we have these conversations. We're not easy as a basics stopping point sometimes. But I also think that social gathering places of the ReFi community, like ReFi DAO, looking at the Gitcoin climate grant round, GR15 is on right now. Give them your money. There's a lot of great spaces in the Web3 space where you can get plugged into climate and really explore so many different use cases that folks are approaching. But I think my comment, if there are any university and young aged humans here, is really get involved locally. You are somewhere physically in the world. There are people there. There are parks, there are farms, there are gardens. There are certainly local community organizations that need help cleaning up their public spaces and their parks and their streets. And I know that when I ran Hilltop Urban Farm, there were times I was the only staff member for 90% of the time I was there. And so I ran a farm a lot of time on college interns for credit and, for minimum wage and, 15 bucks an hour and whatever we could figure out in the budget. And tons and tons and tons of farm work got done from, university, like help the community day or pick up trash day, or a sorority would show up, or a, environmental science class would want to come and get their hands in the soil. So I've had fantastic experiences with young people in climate. I think they care so much. And so I think getting involved locally, even if it's like super simple, like just the garden down the block, I just think it's really enriching and enrolling to be part of your local community at the end of the day. It's our local spaces and places that make the world of Web3 valuable to us. And certainly when I close my computer, I look out at a beautiful world and I'm grateful for that. So local first, still my Web3 motto.
I love it. I also think that it's funny that play on words with Regen Network, it's regenerative, but also regional, I guess, like regional, local. So it's, really cool to kind of remind ourselves that we're located somewhere, and living locally, supporting local communities is important. And also, again, back addressing the audience, if anyone wants to comment or maybe even like have a suggestion on how people are maybe involved in their local communities, feel free to jump in and share or ask a question. I see some emojis, but I don't see any hands or requests to speak yet. Well, in the meantime, I guess like last thing I'm curious about, I'm curious a lot of things, but in the intro, we have a request. Let's see. Helper Social. Hold on, let me see. Helper Social, are you, do you have a question? I don't know if they, their request kind of went away. Well, as we're still waiting for requests, I guess the one thing I wanted to kind of conclude on with today, Sarah, with you, like what's next for Regen? What are you currently working on? What's kind of the bigger vision? Anything cool and exciting you can unveil for us here?
Yeah. This is going to be a very busy month in the world of Regen Network. Sometime, maybe next week, maybe the week after, we'll see. We don't know when. The marketplace is going to launch. So that's going to be really cool. The city forest credits are all of these beautiful urban park restoration projects in the US. So I'm personally really excited. With the ETH merge happening, there's a lot of conversations we're having around the climate impact of the ETH merge and the opportunity for community members with ETH wallets to offset their ETH carbon footprint history. There's a lot of opportunity there that we're excited about. And we are, as a network, we are actually doing our first company-wide retreat next week. We all get on planes on Sunday for the first time since COVID. So it's really exciting. There are many people who have never met each other in person before. So I carry a sense of gratitude that is happening. And then we're going to be going down to New York City for New York City Climate Week. So we are hosting an event on that Friday with Open Earth Foundation and Climate Collective and many other folks from the ReFi community. We are going to have a really fun roundtable climate impact discussion for the evening. And then Team Regen Network is going to Cosmoverse, which is in Medellin, Colombia. And we are a Cosmos SDK-based chain in the Cosmos ecosystem. So we are really excited to go connect with our whole Cosmos community. And then we wrap up this month at the Greenhouse Retreat hosted by the Blockchain Infrastructure Carbon Offsetting Working Group, which Regen Network is a founding member of, where we are bringing together in the jungle Web2 and Web3 carbon market projects to really talk about interoperability standards, how we represent data and claims on chain, and really what we can do if we further our collaboration together as organizations. So our industry is on the cusp of great collaboration, in my opinion, and so it's going to be a very exciting month. So hopefully we'll see some of you out there in person in real world.
It sounds like a lot of exciting travels coming up. Awesome. And we actually have one of our audience members up, Easy. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Please take it away.
Yeah, I think you got it. My name is Simon Easy. Great job, Maya. Great job, Sarah. I really appreciate the conversation on ReFi. So I'm a fourth generation farmer from the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. I've been researching a lot more on regenerative finance for farmers, smallholder farmers in the Niger Delta. So my research basically is how could we help these farmers drive ReFi investments or tree planting events, helping them increase their yield, right? Because what I found out, most of their soil are pretty bad due to the oil drilling and the oil activities, oil and gas activities in the Niger Delta area. So most of them are looking forward to going into indoor farming because their soil is pretty bad, right? So my question is there any project you have in Africa, and how could someone without knowledge of blockchain leverage your technologies? Sarah.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for sharing your story and for your work in your community. There are we have a partnership with the Shamba Protocol, who is working with farmers in Africa. So I would highly recommend you direct message me after this, and I'll get you connected to their team so you can learn about their work because it's a little bit more local to where you're at. And there are a number of and I don't know their names, unfortunately. There are a number of organizations that are currently going through the evaluation for the community-supported DAO process at Regen Foundation that are also located in Africa and working with smallholder farmer communities. So I would recommend first and foremost you get connected to where there are already communities in their network that are in your region. And then learn further, what you can do with some of the tools. So I'd be happy to connect you to the foundation team and to the Shamba Protocol team as well.
That would be great. Sincerely appreciate.
Amazing. Yeah, and I'm hoping maybe we can have Shamba co-host a Twitter Space event with BAF at some point too, as we are rolling out that group blockchain impact series as well. Lots of cool initiatives happening in the space. Yeah, well, in the interest of time, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I just want to say huge thank you, Sarah, for joining us and telling us all things ReFi, Regen, and I think educating people on what's happening in the space is so inspiring and important. So really, thank you so much for your time, and thanks everyone in the audience for connecting in and for some of the questions. And stay tuned for more events focused on blockchain impact from BAF in the future.